start then. Hello, good morning. Everybody here for the session. We'll have today a MOOC Content session. My name is Manuel Castro. I'm from the Spanish University for Distance Education, and I will be the chair of the session today. We will start with, we have 3 papers in the session, and at the end we'll have some short and long paper with the final question. We'll have a couple of questions after each paper, and at the end we'll have some of them. We'll start with the first one, with the top diagram, with the analysis of relevance between modality and English subtitle when FL is student learning with MOOC videos.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, I am Toru Nakahama, who is taking a PhD at Waseda University, Japan. I am interested in educational video, especially how video production influences students' engagement. So I have done several empirical studies evaluating the relevance between video's layout or modality and the student learning effect. Today, I would like to give a presentation about the study using the edX contents, implementation, and evaluation of educational technology. The study title is an analysis of relevance between modality and English subtitle when EFL students learning with MOOC video. I would appreciate if you give me many questions and feedback. Let's start. As a very first part of my presentation, I would like to pick up Mayer's prior works about multimedia learning. In 1998, he has provided some of the most convincing evidence for the modality principle that people learn more deeply from pictures and spoken words than from pictures and printed words. He also noted that printed words will be appropriate when the learner is a non-native speaker. So I think it is quite worthy to review the modality principle in the context of English as a foreign language, EFL. In Japan, there are some EFL studies investigating the effect of English subtitle on multimedia learning. Yoshio 2003 suggested that the way subtitles were presented, especially the use of timing, influenced the student learning effect. And Umetsu 2004 indicated that English subtitle was more effective than Japanese one when students learn English using DVD movies. However, few experimental analyses evaluating relevance between modality and English subtitle are available for right now. In this empirical study, we show the MOOC video to the students. The video belongs to the edX course, implementation and evaluation of educational technology. The course instructors were Dr. Eric Crawford and Ms. Elizabeth Hatton from MIT. We got a permission from them that we use the videos as a stimuli in this experiment. We never added the editing to the original video, so students are supposed to access the edX course and they learn the contents on the edX platform. Students learned educational technology with 3 videos from Unit 4, considering evaluation and learning from evaluation and moving forward. A student watched the video in 3 different conditions: audio modality, visual modality, and multimodality. Audio modality has no picture, English subtitle, and spoken words. And visual modality has pictures, English subtitles, and no spoken words. And multimodality has pictures and English subtitles and spoken words. In all conditions, students had access to the original English subtitle by clicking the CC button. CC button is like this. This picture shows what the screen looks like on the platform. If you click the CC button, you can refer to English subtitle. And I think this function is quite helpful for the EFL learners. One thing about the audio modality, in order to provide an experimental test of Mayer's modality principle in the context of the EFL learning with the video as a stimuli, we had to care about the copyright things. We did not add any editing for the video. As you can image, we could easily make both visual modality and multimodality. However, the way audio modality was presented was to be considered. Here is the way we used. We go up to the edX platform first, and next I Google the black background, and then we put it on the edX screen like this. This is what audio modality screen looked like. We have to say that it has some possibility that the screen distracts the student's concentration, but we did it in this way. Here's the experimental design. Subjects were 66 undergraduates, and they were divided into three groups, Group A and B and C. Their task was to take a test for measurement of the English vocabulary, to learn about educational technology with 3 MOOC videos, take comprehension test, and to complete the questionnaire. We set the English test first because we thought studying a student's English vocabulary influenced the comprehension test scores, and because we would see the relation between the vocabulary and the test score. And the comprehension test was composed of the 4 true-false quiz and 2 multiple choice. And a questionnaire survey, we asked a total of 10 items, which are divided into 5 categories: comprehension, comfort, and concentration, difficulty, and interest. The result of average score in the comprehension test appears in figure 1. The ANOVA with the factor of English vocabulary and presented conditions reveal the main effect for English vocabulary and for the presented condition, but no interaction of English vocabulary. And presented conditions. Pairwise comparison using a Bonferroni correction indicated significant differences in the comprehension test average score among the presented conditions, and visual modality reported significantly higher level of post-test average score than audio modality and multimodality. Here is the result of the questionnaire survey. Significant differences were indicated in 5 categories out of the 5 categories. As you can see the figure, subjects gave a positive assessment to multimedia, even though they did not give a positive assessment to audio modality and visual modality. Here is the detail of the comprehension categories, which is composed of 2 question items. I understood the contents well, and this modality helped to understand the contents well. Students' assessments to multimodality were more positive than to audio and visual modality. And here is a detail of the comfort category, which is composed of the 2 questions items. Instructor's instruction was easy to understand, and the contents were not so difficult. And the students' assessment to multimodality were more positive than to audio and visual modality. Here is a detail of the concentration category, which is composed of 2 question items. I remained focused on the video, and the modality improved my concentration. Students' assessment to multimodality were more positive than to audio and visual modality. Here's a detail of the difficulty category, which is composed of 2 question items. I felt tired to run the contents in this modality, and it was hard to catch up with the subtitles. Students gave a significantly higher score to the visual modality comparing to the other modalities. Here's the detail of the interest category, which is composed of 2 question items. I was interested in the theme of the contents, and I want to run the next video in this modality. And the students' assessment to multimodality were more positive than to audio and visual modality. As a conclusion, comprehension test results suggest that the visual modality is the best performing condition for EFL learner. And there is some possibility that the way EFL students refer to English subtitle differ to the video modality. And from the questionnaire outcome, there is a possibility that the students gave positive assessment to the multimodality, and the student did not give a positive assessment to the audio modality and the visual modality. And I think that I have much work to do for the future, because if the assessment had focused on the listening comprehension, the result will be different. And there are no evidence for the result. And then student learning style will influence the result, and the video contents or production will influence the result. And I pick up the second items. There are no evidence for the result. I'm thinking about using the eye tracker, which name is Toby companies. Actually, I did the different experiment using Toby, and this is like a heat map, what it looks like. So this is a demonstration. This is a different experiment, just an example of how Toby works at the experiment. Let's tackle means fixation time. So fixation time getting longer, the cycle tends to be bigger. So Toby can collect the eye tracking data from the subject. That's quite interesting. So I want to use this way to that experiment, and then I want to get the evidence for the EFL runner's eye tracking system. And that's all for today. Thank you.
Questions?
Do we do questions now or at the end?
Yes, I have a couple of questions here. I have one question there. You talked that you are using some video MOOCs. Do you have using a complete MOOC about that, or
just a video.
Just
so
a video.
Yeah, just 3 videos from the Unit 4. Yeah.
Thank you very much, then. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll have then the second presentation. MOOCs and IP. Copyright, fair use, and JMHH essential from Peter Dicker.
Yes, Peter DeCherney from the University of Pennsylvania. Yes, I want to talk to you a little bit about copyright, and specifically about the exemption for the DMCA that the Copyright Office of the U.S. Granted last year. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. What is fair use? There are actually many exemptions that educators have to take advantage of, including classroom exemptions, exemptions specifically for online education. But most importantly, there's fair use. Fair use, just very simply, are times when you can use copyrighted material without permission. But how do we decide when those times are? This is you don't have to read this, it's not designed for you. I just want to show you, it's very short. In a giant copyright statute, fair use is just a little bit of it's a tiny paragraph. It's designed to be flexible, to change over time. It's made it really robust. I also just wanted to mention they give a non-exclusive list of uses that might qualify as fair use. And they include criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. So the MOOC covers most of them. Right? Many of these are used in classrooms and in MOOCs. So education is one of generally educational uses have the greatest claim to fair use. Oh, by the way, I should say, I'm not a lawyer. I often play one at conferences, but I'm a media communication professor, but I've been involved in the process of creating and lobbying for MOOC exemptions, among other things. So when courts decide fair use cases now, they generally use the Transformative Use standard. Actually, just the IP Scholars List was trying to come up with cases in the last decade that weren't fair use cases that weren't decided using Transformative Use, and there were only a handful, 4 or 5, that anyone could come up with. So it's really the standard for thinking about fair use. It's a revolution in fair use, and it comes from the same place that most revolutions start, in an academic journal. It was an article written by the Second Circuit New York-based judge, Pierre Laval, who had decided a lot of important copyright cases, and he tried to explain his process. And recently it occurred to me, Harvard Law Review 1990. I wonder if the person I'm thinking of was the head of the journal at the time. But it turned out Obama was on the editorial staff. He didn't become the head of the journal until the next year. But maybe he had his hand in crafting the Transformative Use standard. So in Laval's piece, he said when he had to decide fair use cases, he was generally thinking mostly about the first factor, the purpose, and has the purpose been changed? Had the work been repurposed, and had value been added? So if you were taking a work that's designed as a work of entertainment, and you brought it into an educational context, it had a new purpose. A very general example. But thinking about transformative use is really sort of like thinking about a math problem. You have to, a math concept, you have to keep doing problems to get it and think about all different contours. So let me just show you one example. Sadly, this is an example I have to retire now because undergraduates don't know what Enron is. But hopefully it still works here. So when Alex Gibney, the Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker, made a great film about Enron called Enron, the Smartest Guys in the Room, he wanted to show at the end of the film that Enron had entered the popular consciousness. For the last 28 years, there's been one metric for measuring when something enters the popular consciousness, and that's when it's parodied on The Simpsons. And so he wanted to include a clip of The Simpsons. I watched the film when he brought it to pen, and I said, you didn't get permission to use the Simpsons clip, because I know when you write to get permission to use the Simpsons clip, you get a note from Matt Groening said, I created The Simpsons, I love for you to use my work, thank you. And you get a second note from Fox saying, don't listen to Matt Groening, he doesn't own the copyright, we never give permission for anyone to use the Simpsons clip ever. And so he said, that's right, he wrote for permission, he didn't get it, his lawyer decided it was fair use. So here's the clip. You can decide.
Whether I'd be rather be shot as a crook or as an idiot.
I believe the only venue for me is the ride of broken dreams.
Oh, you mean the Enron ride? Let's go.
Enron hit the national psyche. It hit it as sort of the time-tested lesson, and that is if it looks too good to be true, sometimes it is.
We're all gonna be rich!
Broke even.
So it's important that it's still entertaining. We still laugh, right? So one purpose definitely is preserved, but the other purpose is changed. What was The Simpsons doing? They were commenting on Enron. What was Gibney doing? He was commenting on The Simpsons, commenting on Enron. He was showing that popular culture was parodying Enron and understood it in a particular way. But let me give one more example. So transformative use took off as a concept after Laval introduced it. The Supreme Court used it in a really foundational parody fair use case. But the case that really brought it home for me and for lots of other people was a 2006 case called DK Publishing versus the Bill Graham Archives. DK Publishing, even if you don't know, you probably have a DK book at home. It's a highly commercial publisher. They produce encyclopedias, children's books, the Eyewitness series of travel guides. And in 2004 or 5, they wanted to make a picture, a coffee table book about the Grateful Dead. They negotiated with the Bill Graham Archives, the great concert promoter, and they wanted to use posters and ticket stubs. The negotiations fell through, and so basically they asked permission and they were told no. They went ahead and used the stuff anyway. Not only did they use it, they used the entire poster, the entire ticket stub. The whole thing without permission, even though they'd asked for permission. Also, it's a highly commercial work. They're a commercial publisher, they wanted to make money. Not many people bought the book. I bought it because it's a great example of fair use, but that's a small market. And so this was actually a tough case. I was surprised people were on both sides of it. But the judge said, I think very clearly, he wrote a really clear opinion, this is transformative use. These were posters and ticket stubs that were used for promotion of concerts in the 1960s and 70s, and then they might be aesthetic artworks today. In fact, there's a Bill Graham exhibit at the Philadelphia Jewish Museum right now, proving the judge right, that's what they were used for. But here they're used differently. They're put into a collage that tells a history. They're creating a history. It's almost like using a quotation in a tapestry that you might write in history, right? So even the judge the lawyer who represented Bill Graham Archives, who thought this wasn't fair use, actually had apparently a conversion after this, and he's now one of the biggest advocates for fair use, and he's Google's lead copyright counsel. Okay, so fair use. People often think if it's a non-commercial use, it's fair use. If it's commercial, it's not. That's not true. In fact, most of the litigation is about commercial uses. That's who pays to litigate. One important limitation I want to mention is that how do we know? So we used a clip from The Simpsons, but how much could be used? And an appropriate amount is generally the way courts now decide. Is an appropriate amount for the use. And so in the case of DK Publishing, the whole thing was an appropriate amount because it was shrunk. Fair use, the copyright scholar Peter Yazzie has to say, is format agnostic. If it's fair use in a printed book, it's also fair use on the internet. It's the use that makes it fair use, not the scale, how many people have seen it, or the medium it's on or in. That's a hard concept to get our minds around because we like to think the internet changes everything. We like to think that if when you move from one person to 100,000, it's going to change things. But actually, if it's fair use, when I display my work to one person in the audience, it's still going to be fair use if it's shown to 100,000 people. Even though that can be scary, and it's scary for the copyright legislators, as we'll see. So in 1998, Congress passes the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and they said it's illegal to bypass encryption on a digital lock, even if what you're doing is fair use. So you can't access copyrighted material if it's encrypted. If it has a digital lock, you can't unlock it for any reason. I don't know if you've ever seen a DVD that said no copying, but that's at least truly what Hollywood believed with the DMCA. There was no copying, even if it's for an educational purpose, even if it's for something that's very clearly fair use. Congress said, oh, the DMCA is not supposed to interfere with fair use. Of course, it nullifies fair use. How could they say both things? So what they did was they empowered the Copyright Office of the United States, which is part of the Library of Congress. It's actually a strange entity. And they said every 3 years they have to have a rulemaking in which people say fair use has been harmed in a particular field and an exemption should be created so you could bypass the lock and access digital content without permission, which is what fair use is for, and we think fair use is essential to education. So in 2000, they had a rulemaking. There were a couple of exemptions. 2003, a couple of exemptions. 2006, I applied for an exemption for media professors making clips for use in class. Who showed up against me? Everyone. Every studio showed up. Every technology manufacturer showed up. It seemed like a little thing, but everyone said it was crazy. We were building windmills, and I did it practically mostly for the experience. I never thought we'd get the exemption, but we did. And media professors could make clips for use in face-to-face classrooms, or in classrooms, actually. Two things happened after that. One is everyone said, how dare I ask for an exemption for myself and not include biology professors and media professors and students? And they were all right, of course. But we thought we had the best case just for this one narrow exemption. And the other thing that happened was that we got the Copyright Office to rethink the way they created the exemptions, so it was more in line with fair use and transformative use, and it was about users and uses. And that really did open the door for many, many other exemptions. And now there are exemptions for K through 12 teachers and students, university, college faculty and students, very widely, and many, many others. Cell phone unlockers. Recently it was really interesting. They were almost all for Internet of Things, so you can hack your car and lots of other things. You're a refrigerator. And so in the most recent round, I asked for an exemption for MOOCs. It's not clear to me that we needed one, but MOOCs are still new enough that I felt like people thought about them differently. It wasn't clear whether or not they're classes or that they're that they're e-text, e-books. They might be both, or a little bit of both, and there were exemptions for both of those. And so we asked for an exemption for MOOCs. To me, this was personal. I wanted to teach a course on Hollywood since we had the first meeting with Coursera, how many years ago, and I couldn't do it because we couldn't afford to use the clips. And so I went and asked for this MOOC exemption, and we got it. And so it means a few things. The first and really importantly, the Copyright Office won't create an exemption unless they really think what's being done qualifies as fair use. When we asked for an exemption previously for fan video makers who make online vids that are shown on YouTube, they actually took an extra 6 months to watch online videos to see whether or not they thought they were fair use. Your taxpayer money was paying for people watching fan videos for 6 months. But they did the same thing with MOOCs, and they decided that MOOCs, so many of the uses in MOOCs qualified as fair use that it was an area that was being harmed by the DMCA, and an exemption needed to be created. So they created an exemption, but it has some restrictions. So first of all, it means that I can go in and take Blu-ray discs or stream video or DVDs and make clips and use them in my film class, and I did that, and it's launching in November. But there are some restrictions that bring it in line with other parts of copyright law that are designed to regulate online classes. So they want, the use has to be restricted to students in the classroom, or students enrolled in the class. We, meaning me and the team of people I was working with, we think passwords, a password protection, is enough to limit it to the people enrolled in the class. They really worry about redistribution, what someone will do with it afterwards. Even if it's fair use for me to create my video, will someone download it and then do something else with it? So it means we think you can, if you limit it to streaming video and not downloads, you also meet that requirement. It's sad because that harms the people that have the hardest time accessing MOOCs with slow connections in particular. But maybe we'll change that in the future. The biggest question I'm always asked is, does the professor, the teacher, the educator, the leader of the MOOC have to make the clip him or herself, or access the media him or herself, because it's all digital media? And the answer is no. It's very clear that it says relevant staff in the exemption, and so a TA could do it, or IT staff. That would clearly be counted. The thing I saw most misreported was that it said in the exemption that it's limited to nonprofit institutions offering the courses, and so that means a university, a museum, a school offering the course has to be nonprofit, but the platform can be for-profit. That's also very explicit in the exemption. So Coursera, Udacity, it can be for-profit companies offering a MOOC, and they can take advantage of the exemption as long as the provider, the university, whoever, is nonprofit. So this is important for a few reasons. Maybe people were doing it anyway. That's what people told me in 2006. Why would you do this? Everyone's already breaking the law and no one cares. Because they're important gatekeepers. It could be your IT staff, it could be a dean, it could be your general counsel. And what I found in 2006 is people had a document they could bring to them and say, look, we have an exemption, we can actually do this. You don't, there's less of a risk. You now have the document, I can give you the link to it. So just really quickly, so I created my course. It launches in November. I'm excited. I'll show you a clip of something I can do now that I couldn't have done before the exemption. And tell me if you think it's fair use. We can crowdsource it now, and I'll send you a report to the general counsel.
The scene in which the film crew in the movie
So it's the movie King Kong that I was talking about really briefly.
encounters the remote island that is King Kong's home. I want to look specifically at the meeting of the film crew and the people of the island. The first section of the film, before they get to the island, has no music at all. But once the crew reaches the island, Max Steiner's lush, maybe even a bit schmaltzy score takes off, giving a sense of emotion, fantasy, and energy to the drama. Later in the film, it helps to bring the giant ape to life. As the crew explores the island, they hear music in the distance. It turns out to be a ritualistic wedding in which a bride is being offered to Kong. The music from the soundtrack and the music inside the story interact to the point where you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. The film crew's experience of the people on the island becomes analogous to our experience of the film we are watching. With the camera in the story frequently on screen, it's hard to forget that this is a film about filmmaking. When the chief sees the film crew, he raises his staff, and we hear what is called a stinger, a short piece of music that is used as punctuation, and then the music comes to a complete halt. Briefly, the chief takes control of the scene and the movie. As the chief walks towards the film crew, we hear notes on the soundtrack accompanying each of his footsteps. Bum, bum. Do you recognize that technique? It's often used in cartoons to give animated characters a greater sense of depth. It's known appropriately as Mickey Mousing. Here, though, when used with live actors, the Mickey Mousing has the opposite effect. It makes the chief seem cartoonish in comparison to the film's crew. The chief is played by actor Noble Johnson, who often played heavies, bad guys, in Hollywood films, but who, with his brother, also ran one of the most successful independent African-American film companies in the 1920s, the Lincoln Company. The use of music, and Mickey Mousing in particular in this scene in King Kong, turn the island's natives into flat cartoons, which helps us to identify with the film crew, but it's also a reminder of the stereotypical roles available to black actors in Hollywood.
Sit down.
hopefully you think this is something we should be able to do, that it's flawless education, and Warner Brothers shouldn't be allowed to block it as use, whether it's in a classroom, which I think they're comfortable with now, just barely, but also in MOOCs, where 100,000 people could see it, but I'm not going to compete with King Kong. And in fact, we know more people will rent the DVD or watch it on Netflix because I just talked about it.
Hi, I had a comment and a question. So I'm a film producer and I teach the subject as well. And as a comment side, I would argue it is a volume play at this point. I can literally strip George Clooney's voice from a movie, take everything else out, modulate it, and underlie it against somebody else lip syncing it. I can do that within 15 minutes. And the expense and time that it would go for a copyright holder to actually fight against that is almost disqualified. So I think it does start to become an issue of the technology and the platforms that are changing it, not just the use. But on the question that I had for you was.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I think I would expect you to say it's the opposite. If you posted that on YouTube, it could be taken down in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, then I could post it on Vimeo. I could post it, 15 other places.
Yeah, so there are automated
attack.
systems that search for material and have it taken down using DMCA notices constantly. But I actually think the scale has made it complicated both for copyright holders and fair users.
Right. Well, the question I had was, copyright as a concept has been widely expanded from what it was originally intended to be. And do you think this effort of offering exemptions on a regular scale is a philosophical kind of counter-argument to this gross distortion that's taken place over the past century?
So would this be a good model for updating it?
Well, I'm wondering if you think the reason why they've been so open to giving fair use to things like MOOCs is a counterbalance to the Mickey Mousing.
Yeah. Just so you know, nice use of Mickey Mouse. You learned something. So they're not that open to giving MOOCs. They don't give that many exemptions. They don't create that many exemptions. It's really hard. There are all these IP clinics that have popped up at different universities, and they don't have to work full time on this stuff. And I think they like it, and it's great training for young lawyers. But I'm sure there are better uses of their time. So the other option, until pretty recently, only the U.S. had fair use, but it's gone global. So about 10 years ago, South Korea and Israel adopted U.S.-style fair use. Right now, there are about 8 or 9 other countries that are very actively thinking about adopting U.S.-style fair use, and the EU has been considering it as well. A lot of other countries that have British-style copyright but not U.S. fair use have specific exemptions called fair dealing. And what you find is it's so politicized that they just can't adapt. So in the UK, they tried to have a parody exception. Parody is a very core fair use, and it couldn't go through because it was so politicized. The former Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Cameron, said we couldn't have Google, we couldn't have all these internet companies that rely on fair use develop in the UK because we don't have fair use. We're falling behind commercially. In the EU, the argument is that they're falling behind in terms of democratic speech. That the kinds of work that goes on in YouTube and other places because of fair use is really limited in European countries, and they're trying to adopt it in the EU. I think fair use we got lucky maybe, but it's been really brilliant and been able to change over time, and I think that's why it's designed that way. Peter or.
I think your MOOC looks beautiful, and part of the reason maybe it looks so beautiful is because the University of Pennsylvania is so brave in allowing you perhaps to, in backing you to, how many copyright holders out there are on the other side when you release, like is it 5, is it 10, is it 20?
When you release the MOOC?
Yeah.
Hundreds.
And are you bracing yourself? Like, is someone, do they know that you're going to do this? Yeah.
So ironically, the only reason this went through is because there was a lawyer in the position to make the decision at the time. Someone from the law school was the advisor to the provost president on MOOCs. And I went into the meeting And I was pretty sure that it was going to be a meeting about public domain work and licensing, and the person who was the supervisor of the president said, "Sounds like fair use to me." So honestly, I actually was going to do something pretty extreme, which was go to Hollywood and try to get some kind of blanket permission. And I went to the head of the board of trustees of the AFI and said, what do you think? I said, I'm willing to just have it limited to Hollywood studios and just use the clips. Maybe we could get some kind of deal with them. And he said, sounds like fair use to me. So I think there's a really strong argument it's fair use. Also, fair use is kind of like a muscle. You use it or lose it. And all these, every time we start to ask permission, instead of fair use, it actually shrinks. It atrophies fair use.
Do any of them know that you're coming? Do they know that you're about to release this?
I don't know. It seems like it would be silly to tell all the people who want to fire at me that I'm going to be out in the open. They'll figure it out soon enough.
I was just gonna just to clarify, when you use a film clip, you have to use it in context, right? You can't decide to use the sinking of the Titanic to describe fluid dynamics, correct?
Oh, you could.
You can.
Yeah. So this is a kind of this comes
more
this.
Transformative.
Huh?
That's even more transformative.
Yeah. So it's also transformative. That's a specific interpretation of the Supreme Court Two Live Crew case, that it could only be used. Fair use is only when you're using the thing itself to criticize the thing itself. But if you're using it to illustrate something, that is also likely to be transformative. But that is a misconception, and you can trace it back to the reading of a specific case.
Great. I'm glad I'm corrected.
Again, nothing I say is legal advice.
How does this work with alternative licensing? For example, if you have something that is a Creative Commons non-commercial license, is there also fair use for Creative Commons non-commercial license in something like this?
So once you agree to a license, those are the terms.
Okay.
Fair use doesn't apply. So this is actually really important for scholars, for educators. If you go to an archive and they say, we will give you a copy of this manuscript as long as you agree not to use it in your MOOC, you can't use it in your MOOC, even if it would be fair use. You can contractually agree to something far inside of the law. And you often have to gain access. So the documentary filmmakers actually have a DMCA exemption. It was actually one we started to apply for in 2006, and then we backed off, and they did it in 2009. But still, most of them don't take advantage of it because they want the archival footage and because the quality is going to be higher.
So you've talked a lot about, in my head at least, these two different pieces where something is fair use and something is considered transformative, and then also the need for exemptions. Can you unpack a little bit more about why something would need an exemption versus where you might just decide, or Rock might decide, this is fair use?
So transformative use is a way of understanding fair use, measuring fair use, just deciding what's the litmus test for fair use. It's actually just another way of using the first factor that's in the statute, which is, has the purpose been changed? And over time, which factor becomes more important has changed. People used to think it was more about the last factor, which was commercial. Are you interfering with the market? That's still important, but we think that if you change the purpose, that's now the most heavily weighted factor.
At which point would you even bother trying to ask for an exemption because you think that you've already...
No, so the exemption is important for two reasons. One is there is this fair use analysis. So they think that, so there's someone's done this study and thinks that MOOCs engage in fair use pretty often. You only need the exemption if you're accessing digital content that's encrypted, that has a digital log. So DVDs have a CSS encryption. You need to get the DECSS code in order to unlock it. Interestingly, right, so DVD players will have it. So interestingly, no, it's like a fun aside, but no region-free DVD player is licensed with DECSS, right? But PEN only buys region-free DVDs. So even though there's an even though there's no exemption, there's a market for them. But anyway, so the question is, do you need this key or not to unlock it? And so if it's fair use and there's an exemption, then you can access a Blu-ray disc, an online stream that's encrypted, a video. Images can be encrypted, text could be encrypted too. It's less likely.
And in the case where something is in two forms, an encrypted form and a non-encrypted form, can you make the assumption that if it's fair use and you can find a non-encrypted copy of it, that you're allowed to use it, even though there are other encrypted copies?
So that's definitely true. If it's unencrypted and it's fair use, that's okay. And this is the argument that the MPAA made in 2006, is VHS tapes are good enough for education. You don't need high quality images for education. Low quality images are fine. And that was the case I had to make, was that quality was important for education. Thank you very much.
Well, we have the next presentation. We'll be proceeding in the case studio, the visual case studio for MOOCs and beyond from the Columbia University.
So Adam and I are very excited to talk about content. So I think it'll be fun to end this section with some conversation about content. So thank you to our co-presenters for talking about research and the IP.
We have the technology to share something. We were thrilled to be here. We want to show a project that we have. It's great to be back. And last time I was actually here was 2013. I was thinking back that was a big year for a lot of us who care about MOOCs. EDX and Coursera have just done big things. So it's great to come back here now and have a chance to see how this whole field has evolved. So we are going to be talking about a project that actually is not a MOOC, but we think that the process and the audience we had shared a lot with the challenges of making MOOCs, and so we hope we find it's appropriate. Our project started, as I mentioned, in 2013, and it's at SIPA, which is the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia. So for a long time, SIPA has had a Master's in Public Administration, which is focused on training mid-career professionals. And our mission that we were given a couple of years ago was how to translate that to a digital delivery method to be able to deliver actually the Columbia Global Center Network. So Columbia has 8 global centers around the world. We started our work in Rio. There's also centers in Mumbai, India, Beijing, China, Jordan, Nairobi, Kenya. So the model was, how could we train in the same way we've been training mid-career professionals who are in New York, who work in city government or state government, how can we train people overseas? And though that audience was similar to MOOC audience in a lot of ways, because they're mid-career people, they're older, they're international. And so we wanted to think about all those things as we try to approach this whole project and say, how could we train those sorts of people? We also, as part of the project, actually collaborated together with people here today on a MOOC. Jeff Sachs' Coursera and EDX project was part of our project, and we also delivered it as part of our curriculum. So we had spent a lot of time thinking about all those issues in the process. And one of the things we started off doing was studying the face-to-face classes at SIPA. And we realized a lot of them used the case method. They used case studies. And looking a lot like this document you see in the presentation. So it's a 10 to 15-page written document that studied a specific instance as to public policy. The school, most of these were about public policy questions, how to implement a certain project in city government in a certain time, in a certain place, where you have limited resources, limited money, problems, and time, and looking at all those issues. So these sort of cases were used in a lot of the classes. And so one of our challenges was, how could we translate this to a digital delivery medium? And I thought it might be interesting to talk a bit about the history of the case method. So cases started in the 1890s at Harvard Law School. So it actually starts off as a legal brief used in the law school class to discuss a specific trial or a specific case. In the 20s, it was picked up by the business school, and now it's pretty much the standard, I think, for a lot of MBA programs to look at a specific company at a certain moment in time with launching a new project or a new product. And in the 40s, Kennedy School began making public policy cases. And we use these a lot. A lot of the cases we're still using in our program now are in this model. In the 80s, it expanded to other fields like medicine, marketing. But the basic format hadn't really evolved since the 20s or 30s. It was still basically a 10 to 15 page written case that was based on interviews with actors, and so on. There are a couple different types of cases. It's not, in the literature, it's not a sort of definitive answer of what is a case study. There's a certain amount of disagreement. Some are best practices or white case papers. They're looking at a certain policy implementation. And other ones are what people call decision forcing cases, which I kind of try to explain. And it's kind of like watching a movie. It stops, you know, right before the last reel. You don't really know what's going to happen next. So a lot of these cases would describe, say, building the tunnel in Boston in 2006 or whenever. It stops right before a major decision has to be made. And that's another tradition, which at Columbia we've done quite a few of these. We decided that for our audience, we wanted to pull from both of these traditions. So our cases have a bit of both of that. And I'll pass it on to Sandesh. I'll just talk a little bit, I guess, about the key elements of cases and the case method. So all of these different types of cases are based on real-world facts and situations. So they're researched by a research team who either makes phone calls or very often travels around the world and interviews people, makes transcripts of these interviews. So it's very much based on the real situation as interpreted by those actors in that situation. Its goal is to drive towards discussion and action. And it's in the classroom, they're used in a variety of ways, but generally consider that they help learning on a couple levels. Obviously, you learn about the subject matter, you learn a lot about the issue at hand, but you also force students to think on their feet and to make judgments. In our case, the end result was often memos, because we're a public policy school. People had to put themselves in the shoes of an advisor on a bigger policy issue and write a recommendation letter as you would if you were working for a local mayor or a governor, and so on. And now Sanders will talk a little bit about cases at Columbia.
Thanks, Adam. So what are we doing with cases at Columbia? So when we did a scan, I guess a couple of years ago, we found that there are two major players producing cases at Columbia. And not surprisingly, the first one is the business school. And very much like the business school that I'm standing in today, it is very much the bread and butter of every business school now. So it was no different at Columbia. They produce a lot of cases for business courses. And it's 5 to 8 pages on average, I believe.
They're generally shorter. Yeah,
very short. But it's all written cases. And the second player in this area is called Columbia Case Consortium. And what's interesting about the Columbia Case Consortium is that it's not embedded within a school. And they have a much more diverse clientele. They work with journalism school, the law school, international public affairs, even the business school, so it's much more diverse. And what's really interesting about Case Consortium is that they really started thinking about what could be the evolution of the written case. How could they really enhance the user experience than just staring at a PDF? So one early example that they did was, this is from 2011 from the journalism school. You'll see that it's still very much based on the tried and tested written case method. So text is still very much the front and center. But you can see that there's some instructional design going on now. You see different sections, different chapters. There's some multimedia embedded in line. So this was definitely an evolution on the traditional case. So it was an interesting movement. So this is one extreme of slowly starting to rethink what a case could be. At the other end of the spectrum is, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, I think it's called a digital storytelling company. It's like a documentary style film company called In the Telling. And they do these really highly produced videos, documentaries, cases, so on and so forth. And they have their own platform. What's interesting with them is that they actually have flipped the written case, because now video is front and center. The entire narrative is driven by video, and you have transcriptions on the side, you have in-video quizzing, so there's a lot going on in that one platform. But the problem is that there was a lot of cognitive overload for students. And one survey feedback that we got was that it was like staring at a video game, because there was just so much going on. So this is the other extreme of when you flip it completely. So what our friends at CETA have done is that, really evaluate, okay, there are these 3 different approaches, what can we do? And still make it effective and fun. So the formula was to really stick with what we know and do well. The first one is keep the written cases as they are. The classic written form, just keep it as they are, but also produce a companion piece that talks about that case to really visualize it, which you'll see in a little bit. So that was the formula, so it's still separated but presented to students. And the second is you need two very different skill sets. The first is you need the writers, the very journalistic, the investigation, the research that you need to do to write these cases, but also you need these storytellers to really express it in video and audio format. And the cases that Adam will be talking about shortly mostly deal with policy implementation, because these are all produced for the International Public Affairs classes. But we hope you find it interesting. So rather than just talk about it, we'd like to show one of those. Right?
So we delivered all of our cases on the Canvas platform. So this is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Canvas. This is a slightly modified version of the it's actually, it didn't modify the underlying code in any way. It's actually gone through a couple different releases since then.
It's
still
a beautiful
working,
site.
but it's very, we try to basically make it pretty streamlined. So a lot of our classes all look this way, and a lot of them have cases. And so students would go to the case section, which are, depending on the class, they're assigned on a weekly basis, or often students choose a few cases. We do a lot of comparative cases because it's a policy school, so we often look at, say, school reform in Rio, in New York, and Mumbai, and compare how a certain similar set of policies played out in a couple of cases. So we're going to show you one case here on public-private partnerships for parks. And so all the cases are delivered in this format. At the top, there's a 10 to 15 minute intro video, which we'll play a bit of. We also have a place for, we have a traditional written case that students download. So the idea is that, especially for international students, a lot of times they don't have the cultural, the same background. They don't understand what New York was like in the 70s or 80s. And so to have a chance to see some visuals before you jump in and read the case, we thought would be useful. And the written case mirrors the video case in that it's the same people being interviewed, it's the same issues basically covered. Obviously, you can do different things in a written case than you can in a short video. So we try to have these two things travel together. We also have these discussions, which we made available, which aren't necessarily obligatory, they're optional extra, but we interview a lot of famous policymakers, presidents of countries, chiefs of big organizations, and seemed ashamed to include just a small snippets in the video, which ends up happening. So we made available longer excerpts also, as well as memos. So we'll show you a bit of this case, which looks at basically public-private partnerships for green spaces. So we looked at the Central Park Conservancy, which many people don't know is actually a private group running New York's biggest green space, and also the Highline. So this is a short video intro to that case.
New York City has two of the most iconic and heavily visited public parks on the planet, Central Park and the Highline.
There is no park in the world that has the charisma of Central Park.
The Highline itself was a kind of unofficial space. The tagline was, "This is our generation Central Park."
Yet what few people understand is that these public places are privately run and largely funded through private donations.
Parks has been something that's been public-private since the very beginning.
It is an arrangement that has come under increased scrutiny in recent years.
The challenge of the inequity in parks funding in New York City is very deep, very serious, and has to be addressed.
Central Park was created and designed when northern Manhattan was still a semi-rural frontier. Its 778 original acres were landscaped during the American Civil War, following a master plan by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux.
Central Park is the quintessential 19th century park. It's built as a pastoral respite from the density and character and force of urban life.
Under the leadership of Robert Moses in the 1930s and 40s, Central Park was integrated into a citywide park system.
When I was growing up in New York, you would go to a park and there'd be a building and there'd be a person there called a parkie. And the parkie would hand out basketballs and also keep their eye on the property. So there'd be no graffiti, there would be no violence, or if there was violence, the parkie would call the cops.
But New York City's near bankruptcy in the 1970s saw a general disintegration of city services, perhaps most notably in the Parks Department.
where on summer weekends youngsters by the thousands gather.
The 60s were not kind to Central Park. The happenings, the be-ins, the love-ins, all the activities completely destroyed the grass. The management was demoralized.
I'll never forget getting off the bus at 90th and 5th and walking down the bridle trail and seeing more rats than people, and then walking down to the Great Lawn, which was referred to as the Great Dust Bowl, and going by Turtle Pond up to the castle, and Turtle Pond was filled with dead fish, and it literally stunk. And then the castle just covered with graffiti, wrapped in razor wire, and completely closed off to the public. It was amazing.
In 19...
Give you a little flavor of the style. And we'll also share a little bit what we call the discussion, which again is a chance to hear more of some of the people interviewed on a certain issue.
I could spend my entire time doing nothing but worrying about Central Park, trying to make it better, trying to correct problems. And I had parks in all 5 boroughs that I had to worry about. They were all in bad shape. And I had to find some way to balance my time. So 2 people came to see me, George Soros and Richard Gilder. And they had created something called the Central Park Community Fund, which they basically were funding out of their own pockets, which was an organization dedicated to sort of maintenance, better maintenance in Central Park.
I became the director of...
Anyway, so it's just that for those who wanted to and had the time, it gives us a chance to give a lot more of the interview for some of the key people. And the platform also has assignments, it has social sort of learning elements that allow people to comment on the case before they would discuss it, be it at the face-to-face class or online. Again, a lot of this was delivered online to students in Brazil who were public policy people who were at the time thinking about a lot of these same sort of problems. This is right before the Olympics were coming up. They were doing massive projects, trying to think about how to create green space in this case and other types of, anyway, so for them it was very interesting to see similar problems in other cities and to get that context. We also have groups from India and other places who, again, it's hard to have this context sometimes if you don't see it, so that was some of the thoughts. We obviously wanted to, after doing this, we just don't want to sort of pat ourselves on the back, so this is great. We wanted to say, hey, does this actually help learning? What are the outcomes? So we did some.
Yeah, so Adam will be sharing some preliminary research data. Again, caveat that these are all self-reported and not in a MOOC context, so this is, so take it with a grain of salt, I would say.
Yeah, so we plan actually next year to do further studies, and actually what we're going to share with you now is just basically self-reporting assessments done in anonymous surveys of about 50 students, some in the US doing face-to-face and some doing it online. And we plan next year to actually do a more elaborate study and actually look at also outcomes and grades and think about how that affects, but we've decided this was the best
way to things like, what is it, like how long they've stayed in the video, what the dropout rates are, and so on. Yeah, the good stuff.
So that's our next
I'll give it to you.
Okay. Well, so this is the results from students actually who are using the MOOCs in New York, in the traditional face-to-face class. And so we asked them to compare and evaluate from their perspective. We gave some of them only the written case, the same written case on the parks, and some of them the full audiovisual package that you saw. And so we asked them, how effective was it? How engaged were they? Comprehension, and obviously the big jump we saw was engagement. So people reported being more engaged, which was interesting. We were both sitting and watching our colleague's presentation this morning. Some similar things, trying to ask how does video versus written affect learning and engagement. So in this particular case, that seemed to be a strong result. It also helped in comprehension and people self-reporting. With the students who were doing it on the blended model overseas, we also, just so you know, we had some students who were doing it on the blended model who were in the US. So we not only international students here, but students who were doing it where it's mostly distance learning. They meet as a cohort in the summer in our program, but most of the courses they take are remotely, and we have weekly sessions via Zoom. And for them, comprehension took a big jump, and we felt that was that sort of validated some hopes and assumptions we had when we went into doing this project, and it seemed to make sense given that you are, in a Zoom session where you're not physically in the same space, having had a shared visual experience beforehand, that you've watched something like this helps drive discussion, perhaps. And we also saw even a stronger difference with the international students. And again, this was something that we sort of hoped that we might find, and we were happy to see this in a way, because we definitely felt that we had a lot of international students who were experts in their area. They were mid-career professionals, very similar in a way to the sort of people we train in New York, but might not know a lot about the context of it. So we've actually done these cases not just in the States, we filmed them in India, in Brazil, in Rwanda, in Ghana, Congo. So we've received funding to do quite a few of these around the world, which has been fantastic. And I think in every case, they tried to quickly introduce people to a certain issue in this way. And this is kind of a gimme. We asked them if you like the audio better. They said, yes, so we're happy to see that. But that was kind of shock. And we want to very much open up to discussion. I just thought we'd end with a few things that we're talking about, thinking about. We have a number of our colleagues here from Columbia, the Center of Teaching and Learning, and we're, one of the things that we're definitely thinking about, where we'd love to explore more, is thinking about a collaborative platform within Columbia. As Sanders mentioned, the CASE consortium, that's very much the mission there, and we think that maybe, especially now with the move to where all of Columbia is now going to the Canvas platform, so it's an interesting opportunity for us perhaps to share assets more easily. This is a lot of classes start thinking about redoing their website. So having these cases are, they're sort of usable in a lot of contexts. We've had our case used at Mailman. The same case about, say, school reform has been used at Teachers College, business school, and at SEPA for different reasons, but there are a lot of issues involved. So we feel that these might be units. I think, Peter, you're going to talk this afternoon about openness and MOOCs, and so maybe this is one area where these could be smaller assets that might be open and might be shareable. And so we want to explore that within Columbia and also with you guys. We want to explore it with the wider MOOC community of creators of MOOCs. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about for a while. I think to make it really work, we probably have to come up with a platform so every case would be delivered in a usable way that anybody could just download into an EDX course or into a Coursera course or into Blackboard or into Coursera. So the idea would be to make them create a platform where we deliver with all the bells and whistles these various elements. And we're also thinking about making it more scalable. Obviously, when you send a film crew to Brazil or Rwanda is a big undertaking. However, we started doing some cases in a simpler way where we think we get a lot of the same learning outcomes, where we basically do interviews in our studio or remotely, but in a standard way, and use stills. But I think if we still weave a story and introduce people visually to things, we feel like we have a lot of the same impact, and those are something that's much more scalable and other people could do, and maybe some of our colleagues here could do with us. And
a lot cheaper.
And a lot cheaper. And finally, we're very excited about a new collaboration we have with PBS that's going to start showing some of these cases. Knock on wood, it's taken a year and a half between the Columbia bureaucracy and the PBS bureaucracy to get it done. And later on, I want to find out more about the IP issues because there are a lot of them. But they're going to start showing some of these on PBS NewsHour weekend and also Metro Focus through WNET in New York. So we're very excited about that. And that's what we wanted to share with you, but we'd love to hear your questions and chat about this.
Okay, so the sticky wicket that I see is that the cases do bring the multimedia perspective that you'd like to use and put in on MOOC, but it's not fair use because it's not transformative use. I mean, if you're trying to use the Army crew team case I saw there, or that case on public-private partnerships, thank you. How do you do that?
Up till now, we've licensed all of it for that reason, because we wanted to get access to the high
License,
quality,
right.
we've licensed it. We get, as an educational institution, we've paid less, but we've licensed it all, yeah.
Yes. I want to thank you for playing a little Zeppelin in the morning.
Yeah.
That's really,
Now, one thing we didn't license, I listened to it.
I was wondering about that. But I
Yeah.
did. That's not my question. My question though relates to that, which is, this is like the third Learning with MOOCs conference, and we are very shy about talking about money so far, in these conversations. It's kind of funny, because you can't do much without it, and it's so beautiful what you've done. Can you say anything about the scale of the budgets per something, minute, hour, or something?
Sure, I mean, we started this whole project, we basically, SEPA didn't have an in-house online team. So it really started off just with myself and one other guy, and then we reached out to some other partners at the university, and together we kind of pulled it off. So basically, we now have some in-house resources. So when you have in-house resources, it cuts down, your costs. So we've basically been funded through grant funding for a couple different important grants that allowed us to buy equipment. We still outsource the hiring the camera people, and we work with different case writers. So in terms of what these cost, it kind of depends on how many you're going to do at once and where they're going to be done. But they vary. I mean, an international case study, you're not going to produce something like this for less than $50,000, $100,000. Often we do a couple together, and often we do an academic project together. So we did a sort of a year and a half engagement with Central Africa, where we produced a couple different cases. We did research. We've been back and forth through one in the Congo. So it was part of a bigger project. But I think the idea of we also can do these, scalable, simpler cases at a much lower price point. We're basically, the way we're doing, we've transformed our space at New York City, at Columbia, as you know, is hugely difficult to find. So we sort of changed, we put a little studio in our office, and that'll allow us to do interviews with faculty on a sort of set background, both for PBS but also for these cases. So we think that we've also started using remote crews, where we sort of send them a production Bible and they shoot remotely interviews for us in Berlin or Delhi or wherever, and it looks exactly like we did in our studio. And we're able to do that partly because we're not filming them in their office, but in a neutral background, so it's a lot easier to local crew we could hire. We also found a very good company that helps us source local shooters. Story Hunter, I'll give you a plug there, could check them out. So that's kind of, so we think that for those sort of cases, the external costs really come down to hiring a remote crew for a couple days of shooting, and that often could be $600, $700 to get a very good quality interview done with an expert, or a couple interviews done in one day. So you could potentially do, 3 interviews at an agency in Nairobi. If you had someone in your staff to organize those interviews, you could use Story Hunter, which is how we do it, to hire a local shooter in that country. You do the interview via Zoom remotely, which is what we do. I'm doing one this afternoon with a guy in Brazil. So they have a crew in Brazil is going to their office, and I'm going to do the interview remotely. So that's kind of, that's what we built the Cadillac. Now we're trying to make the slightly less, golf carts. Yeah, something, because I think that's what it needs. And we have a lot of professors coming to us wanting to take a case. I know there's a wonderful bunch of, Andy and I, we've talked quite a bit about a bunch of the cases that we have. Wonderful cases in the Columbia Case Consortium that were done 4 or 5 years ago that maybe we could, update now in this format, but we'd have to figure out a price point that we could do it at that's sustainable.
One of the challenges with the case pedagogy is that things change in the world. And so if you're doing particularly decision-based cases, do you have a guidebook of how you're going to iterate on this material as the ground shifts?
It's for me, the decision forcing model was kind of new. So when I came in this whole project, the person who needs to be mentioned, Kirsten, who kind of helped create, along with a lot of other people here, the Columbia Case Consortium, she was a real champion of this model. And so we feel we like a lot of elements of it. We include it, but as a policy school, we're a little less. Obviously, people make a difference. So it's if you could interview a Bill Bratton and talk about the 1990s in New York, that's really interesting. But we don't want to ultimately be about that person. We want it to be about the general policy issue. So we're less, and also it makes it also, frankly, politically easier for us to do these. If these were, we couldn't do these films if they were very personal studies of a person and their problem, because it's just so heavy, it's so complex. As a documentary filmmaker, you know it's very hard to do a film about someone's life in detail and have everyone feel okay about it. So basically, we focus more on the policy. But yeah, it ends at a certain point. So there's, we're talking about a couple things. One is going back and updating. We did a big thing about big data in New York City, and obviously there's a big move down to update it, given a lot of things have been happening with policing and body cameras and all those issues in the last couple of years. But I think it's designed to be a capsule, a time capsule of something that was going on at a certain place in time, and it's sort of open-ended. And generally, we're trying to not show, it's not black and white. It's complex. We're doing cases right now about aid and development in Africa, and it's very complex because, incredibly well-intentioned people are spending lots of money to do things that often have very different outcomes. Anyways, it's not, nothing is, a good case for me is not, it's not very clear. You watch it, you end up thinking, wow, there's a bunch of things that might be the right next step.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. It's very timely for a project that we're working on. I'm wondering if you encountered any pushback from faculty who said, we've always done cases this way, it's got to be 15 pages of text, stop bringing these videos in.
Well, we do the 15-page text. So yeah, I mean, no, in general, generally people get very excited about it because, especially if they have a case that they teach a lot and that is something that they care a lot about. But writing the text and having those two things go together is the big challenge, because a lot of times the most powerful story arc for the written case is not the same as the video. So it took us a lot of time to figure out how to manage those two teams and the timing, and obviously we in the written case can get in a lot of areas that the video case just doesn't have the time to get into or doesn't have the competency to do so. But making the written case in the same, and we haven't really changed that format very much. If you read our written cases, they really look very much like the ones that people have always done, because it works. People read it, they're engaging, they function.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and time to lunch.
Hi, I have a question.
I'm sad that I'm not more involved showing it. Mostly involved.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, good. So we're yes, yeah. That would be,